What if I told you that the key to real happiness is giving up on 90% of the things you think you care about? Not caring more, caring less. Because the day you stop seeking approval, defending yourself, and chasing after applause is the day you start living free. Listen to me. You've been programmed since childhood to believe that caring more makes you more valuable. But the more you worry, the more responsible you are. That sacrificing your peace for other people's comfort makes you a good person. But I came to tell you this: that lie is the enemy of your joy. You are not here to carry every burden. You are here to carry your mission. Most people live under the illusion that caring deeply about everything and everyone makes them stronger, more compassionate, and more admirable. But this belief, while it sounds noble, is a silent thief of personal power. The truth is, caring selectively is power. Not everything deserves your emotional investment. Not everyone is worth your mental energy. And the sooner you accept that, the closer you move to a life of real happiness and inner control. Let's examine what happens when you care too much about the wrong things. When you let every opinion, every glance, every imagined judgment penetrate your mind, you're surrendering your peace. You begin living reactively, constantly adjusting yourself to avoid disapproval or earn praise. In doing so, you're not living your life. You're living a version of yourself, edited by other people's expectations. This is not power. This is emotional slavery. Caring selectively means you recognize that your energy is limited. Just like time, it's a non-renewable resource. When you waste it on things that don't matter in the long run, like impressing acquaintances, defending yourself on social media, or worrying about gossip, you rob yourself of energy that could have gone toward your purpose, your growth, or your peace of mind. Selective caring is a discipline. It's not indifference, it's intention. You don't need to respond to every comment. You don't need to explain yourself every time someone misjudges you. You don't need to internalize every criticism. Why? Because not all criticism is truth. Not all feedback is wisdom. And not every person has earned the right to influence your internal world. When you begin to care selectively, you start asking questions like, does this person's opinion align with my values? Is this worth my energy? Does this issue truly affect my future? Most times the answer is no. When you care about everything, you dilute yourself. You become scattered, pulled in 20 directions, exhausted by invisible obligations that serve no purpose. But when you choose carefully what to care about, you become concentrated, focused, potent. There is power in that. Most people fear the idea of caring less because they think it makes them heartless or disconnected. But it's the opposite. Caring less about the noise makes room to care more deeply about what matters. You become more present in your relationships, more intentional with your time, more effective in your mission. Selective caring doesn't make you colder. It makes you sharper. You can observe this in highly effective people. They don't waste time defending themselves to critics or chasing every conversation. Why? Because they've trained themselves to rise above the emotional clutter. They've filtered out the irrelevant, and in doing so, they've gained clarity. Clarity that most people never reach because they're too entangled in emotional debt with people they don't even respect. There's also a psychological shift that happens when you care less about things that don't align with your values. Your nervous system relaxes. Your anxiety drops. You stop catastrophizing every small conflict or misunderstanding. Instead of asking, what will people think? You start asking, does this serve me? That one question is a weapon. It pierces through drama, guilt, and conditioning like a sword. You become immune to manipulation. People can no longer control you with approval or rejection because your emotional thermostat is no longer in their hands. Some will misunderstand your detachment. That's fine, let them. Detachment doesn't mean you stop loving people. It means you stop needing their validation to feel whole. You stop performing. You start leading. You no longer care to win every argument or convince people who don't even try to understand you. This saves you enormous time and mental bandwidth. The less you care about distractions, the more time you have to build something meaningful. Selective caring returns your energy to its rightful owner, you. You become your own center of gravity again. You begin living from conviction, not reaction. And as a result, your mind becomes lighter, your direction becomes clearer. You experience peace, not the absence of problems, but the absence of unnecessary emotional involvement. So caring selectively is not just a mindset, it is a strategy for mental freedom. It is the quiet discipline of choosing your emotional investments like a wise investor chooses assets, not based on noise, but based on long-term value. And the truth is, most things won't matter in 5 years. Most people you're trying to impress today will forget what you said or did by next week. But the energy you lose trying to impress them, that loss stays with you. It compounds, and that's a cost you don't need to keep paying. The path to happiness isn't paved by caring more, it's cleared by caring less. Strategically, intentionally, powerfully. The pursuit of external validation is one of the most deeply rooted psychological traps a person can fall into. It begins early, perhaps with a gold star in school, a parent's nod of approval or applause for a good performance. Over time, the need to be liked, accepted, and praised becomes a hidden compass, guiding choices, shaping behavior, and defining self-worth. But the more you chase that validation, the more power you hand over to others. You stop being the author of your life and become a performer in someone else's script. External validation is seductive because it feels good, temporarily. The praise, the likes, the compliments, they create a dopamine hit. You feel seen, you feel enough, but like any high, it fades. And once it fades, you begin to crave the next fix. Your sense of peace becomes dependent on feedback, and in that dependency, you lose the ability to stand strong in silence, in solitude, or in rejection. What most people fail to realize is that external validation is not just unreliable, it's unstable. The same people who praise you today may criticize you tomorrow. The same audience that claps for your success can turn cold the moment you say something they disagree with. When your identity is built on how you're perceived, you become fragile. You bend to avoid criticism. You shrink to avoid standing out. You overextend to stay liked. In doing so, you abandon your own standards to live by someone else's fluctuating approval. Living for validation forces you into the exhausting game of image management. You start curating everything, your words, your choices, your lifestyle, not because they're true to you, but because they'll earn you applause. You don't act from conviction, you act from expectation. And that gap between who you are and who you're pretending to be creates anxiety. It fractures your integrity. You feel like a fraud even when others think you're impressive, because deep down you know they're applauding a version of you that isn't real. This performance takes a toll. You start feeling burnt out, not from work itself, but from the effort of constantly managing how others see you. You can't relax, you second-guess yourself, you replay conversations in your head, worried about what someone may have thought. Every decision becomes a balancing act between what you want and what they might think. It's an invisible leash that grows tighter the more you succeed in pleasing others. There's also a deeper issue. When you seek validation, you give other people the power to define you. Their opinions become your mirror. If they like you, you feel good. If they criticize you, you feel crushed. You stop checking in with your own standards. You don't ask yourself what you think, what you value, or whether you approve of your actions. You outsource your self-worth. And when you do that, your internal compass goes quiet. You no longer trust your intuition because your decisions are based on applause, not alignment. This doesn't just affect your peace, it affects your progress. The need for validation can make you play small. You might avoid taking risks because you fear judgment. You might delay sharing your ideas because you want them to be perfect. You might stay in roles or relationships that don't serve you simply because they make you look good. In every case, your growth is limited by the fear of how others perceive you. And the cruel irony is that no amount of external praise can ever fill the void left by self-betrayal. When you stop chasing validation, something powerful happens. You begin to build trust with yourself. You start making choices that align with your values, even if they're unpopular. You stop needing everyone to agree with you. You accept that being misunderstood is the price of authenticity, and in that acceptance, you find freedom. Your mood is no longer dictated by someone's reaction. Your identity is no longer tied to someone's opinion. You become grounded, not in approval, but in truth. Letting go of the need for external validation is not about becoming rebellious or indifferent. It's about shifting the source of your confidence from outside in to inside out. It's about knowing who you are so clearly that praise no longer inflates you and criticism no longer deflates you. You hear both, but neither controls you. You can respect feedback without being enslaved by it. You can stay open without being easily swayed. And this isn't just emotional strength, it's strategic wisdom, because the most powerful people in the world aren't the most liked. They're the most certain. They don't need the crowd to believe in them. They move first, speak truth, and act boldly, even when it costs them popularity. That's what makes them magnetic. That's what makes them leaders. Because real confidence doesn't shout. It doesn't need to be seen. It simply stands calm, firm, and unshaken. In a world filled with noise, distractions, and constant stimulation, the ability to focus has become a rare and valuable asset. Yet most people unknowingly sabotage their own clarity by becoming emotionally entangled in things that do not serve them. The more you care about things outside your control, people's opinions, minor setbacks, imagined outcomes, the more cluttered your mind becomes. This emotional clutter is not just inconvenient, it's deeply costly. It fragments your attention, dilutes your energy, and clouds your decision-making. Emotional detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. And clarity is the foundation of effective focus. When you're emotionally attached to every outcome, every interaction, every interpretation of your actions, your mind is constantly on alert. You worry how things will turn out, how others perceive you, and whether you've made the right impression. That worry breeds indecision. It creates mental loops that prevent you from moving forward with confidence. You hesitate, overanalyze, and get stuck in cycles of doubt. Focus requires stillness, not chaos. But emotional attachment is chaos. It amplifies noise, exaggerates risks, and shrinks your ability to act with calm precision. Detachment, by contrast, brings freedom. It's the ability to observe without being consumed. It allows you to assess situations objectively rather than emotionally. You don't become apathetic, you simply become discerning. You begin to realize that not every comment deserves a response, not every problem is yours to solve, and not every situation merits your emotional investment. This restraint is not weakness, it is control. And in that control, you find mental space to think, plan, and execute with purpose. The mind works best when it's not under siege. Focus is not just about willpower, it's about what you eliminate. When your thoughts are tangled in drama, insecurities, or external judgments, you cannot think clearly. Your attention becomes reactive, bouncing from one emotional trigger to another. But when you step back, when you say, "This doesn't need my emotional energy," you pull your mind out of the storm. You create space between stimulus and response. And in that space, you find control. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop being ruled by feeling. You still experience joy, sadness, frustration, or excitement, but they pass through you instead of anchoring you. You observe them, acknowledge them, but don't become them. This separation between feeling and identity is what keeps your vision clear. You no longer make decisions from a place of fear, insecurity, or desperation. You act from awareness, not reaction. Focus is also about direction. A mind that is emotionally tangled cannot stay pointed in one direction for long. It is too easily swayed by circumstances, moods, and the shifting opinions of others. But when you detach emotionally, you become anchored in purpose. You don't need the moment to feel good. You need the mission to stay true. You are no longer pulled by temporary discomforts or fleeting approval. You endure the dull parts, the hard parts, the boring parts, because your focus is no longer fueled by emotion, but by commitment. This kind of clarity gives you speed. While others waste energy overthinking what someone might think or obsessing over imagined consequences, you move, you take action, you learn, adjust, and keep going. Emotional detachment creates momentum because you no longer pause at every emotional checkpoint. You're not weighed down by every disappointment. You don't take setbacks personally. You keep your emotions aligned with your long-term direction rather than your short-term feelings. There's also a hidden strength in being hard to offend. When you detach from needing everything to go your way, you become resilient. Criticism doesn't derail you. Misunderstandings don't paralyze you. Disapproval doesn't shake you. You are able to keep your mind on the task, your eyes on the vision, and your energy on what matters. That makes you dangerous. In the best way, not reckless but calm under pressure, not indifferent but unshakable. This doesn't happen by accident, it's a discipline. You train yourself to pause, to evaluate, to ask, does this require my emotional involvement? Most times it doesn't. Most of what triggers people into emotional storms is not about survival or values, it's about ego. And ego is the enemy of clarity. When you remove ego from the equation, focus returns. You are no longer trying to prove, please, or defend. You are simply doing the work, mastering the process, and staying aligned. The power of emotional detachment lies in what it protects. It shields your mind from unnecessary drama, your time from meaningless distractions, and your energy from emotional leaks. In doing so, it sharpens your focus. You begin to operate from a state of centeredness that others can't understand. While they're spinning in cycles of reaction, you're building. While they're caught up in petty conflicts, you're moving in silence. Emotional detachment is not the absence of care, it's the elevation of purpose. And from that elevation, your vision becomes unstoppable. So if you're tired of the noise, the guilt, the endless loop of pleasing others and losing yourself, stay with me. I'm about to show you how caring less is not selfish, it's your ultimate freedom. Happiness is often spoken about as if it's some elusive state to be chased, acquired, or stumbled upon. People tie it to achievement, relationships, money, or status, but at the core of lasting happiness is something much simpler and far more within your control: your boundaries. When you lack emotional and mental boundaries, your inner world becomes a dumping ground for everyone else's problems, expectations, and projections. Without boundaries, you take on more than you're meant to carry. You become overwhelmed, anxious, and drained. And in that state, happiness isn't just out of reach, it becomes impossible to sustain. Most people don't struggle because life is too hard. They struggle because they're carrying things that don't belong to them. They say yes when they mean no. They tolerate disrespect to avoid conflict. They give their time, energy, and attention to people and problems that leave them empty. They confuse being needed with being loved. And they sacrifice their peace in exchange for temporary approval. But every time you do that, every time you betray yourself to please someone else, you chip away at your joy. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are filters to protect what matters. They define where you end and where someone else begins. Without clear boundaries, you can't know which thoughts are truly yours. You begin internalizing the moods, fears, and chaos of others. You feel guilty for resting, anxious for saying no, and responsible for fixing things that are not yours to fix. This emotional entanglement becomes a lifestyle, and over time it hardens into resentment. You resent the people who constantly take, but more than that, you resent yourself for allowing it. Real happiness is quiet. It doesn't scream. It doesn't beg to be seen. It grows in the space where you choose yourself without guilt. That space is created through boundaries. When you draw a line, when you say this is mine and that is not, you begin to reclaim your time and mental clarity. You no longer allow people to drain you with their chaos. You stop showing up out of obligation. You no longer equate constant availability with love. Instead, you begin to protect your energy like the limited resource it is. People fear setting boundaries because they fear rejection. They worry that by saying no, they'll lose love, connection, or approval. But that fear is rooted in the belief that your worth is tied to your usefulness. That belief is a lie. You are not here to manage everyone's comfort. You are not responsible for how others react to your truth. And if someone withdraws their love because you set a boundary, they weren't offering love. They were offering control. Every time you enforce a boundary, you strengthen your self-respect. And self-respect is a form of inner peace. When you no longer allow others to violate your time, energy, or values, you create a safe space inside yourself. You begin to trust that you won't abandon yourself for acceptance. That trust turns into confidence. That confidence turns into ease. And that ease creates happiness, not the kind that spikes in moments of pleasure, but the kind that sustains itself in the background of your daily life. Happiness rooted in boundaries doesn't depend on perfect conditions. It doesn't require everyone around you to behave. It flows from your ability to manage what you allow into your world. When you choose your inputs, what you hear, who you're with, where your energy goes, you begin to feel lighter. You no longer carry guilt for resting. You no longer fear being misunderstood. You begin to live in alignment with your own rhythm, not someone else's urgency. There's power in being able to say, no, I won't take that on. There's clarity in asking, is this my responsibility, or am I being pulled into something that's not mine? These are not selfish questions. They are necessary ones. Because every yes you give to something unaligned is a no to your own peace. And peace is not a luxury. It is the soil where true joy grows. You can't access that joy if you're constantly overextended, emotionally raw, and mentally scattered from carrying invisible weights that aren't yours. Setting boundaries will disappoint people. That's inevitable. But the disappointment of others is far less damaging than the chronic self-abandonment that comes from being boundaryless. And ironically, when you start setting limits, you attract people who respect them. You create deeper, more honest connections, because relationships built on guilt and obligation are shallow. But those built on mutual respect and clarity can actually breathe. To experience real happiness, you don't need to do more. You often need to do less. Less explaining, less rescuing, less tolerating what drains you, more protecting your peace, more guarding your energy, more standing in the truth of what you need and what you no longer accept. That's not harsh, that's wisdom. And within that wisdom, happiness doesn't just visit, it stays. Self-worth is one of the most powerful forces in a person's life. Yet it's also one of the most misunderstood. Many people spend years trying to feel valuable by collecting the approval of others, fitting into roles that aren't true to them, and chasing goals that were never theirs to begin with. They think that if they achieve enough, look a certain way, get recognized, or please the right people, they will finally feel worthy. But real self-worth doesn't come from the outside. It doesn't need to be granted. It doesn't need to be proven. It comes from within. And it's built when you stop caring what others think and start acting from your own truth. When your self-worth depends on external validation, you live your life as a reflection of what others want rather than who you really are. You measure yourself through someone else's lens. Every choice becomes a negotiation between what feels authentic and what will earn praise or avoid criticism. Over time, you start to lose touch with your own preferences, your voice, and your vision. You feel the need to be agreeable, to be impressive, to never rock the boat. That constant performing becomes exhausting. And deep down, you still don't feel whole, because nothing external can fill a space that requires inner conviction. There's a quiet confidence that comes from knowing your worth without needing someone else to confirm it. That confidence doesn't shout. It doesn't depend on likes, titles, or applause. It shows up in the way you walk into a room without trying to be the most liked person there. It shows up when you say what you really think, even when it's not popular. It shows up when you say no without explaining yourself. This kind of self-worth isn't reactive, it's steady. It's rooted in self-respect, not social approval. Caring too much about what others think is the fastest way to dilute your identity. You start making decisions that aren't aligned with your values, just to avoid disapproval. You choose silence over truth. You take on commitments that drain you, all to maintain an image. And the more you do this, the more distant you become from your real self. You may be liked by many, but known by none, including yourself. That gap between who you are and who you pretend to be creates anxiety. It forces you into a constant state of self-monitoring. You become hyper-aware of how you're being perceived, and that awareness becomes a prison. The moment you stop trying to manage how people see you, everything shifts. You begin to act from a place of alignment rather than fear. You stop editing your personality to fit the room. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. You realize that your value doesn't increase when others approve of you, and it doesn't decrease when they don't. Not facts, not definitions, and certainly not verdicts on your worth. People often confuse humility with insecurity. They think self-worth must be quiet, apologetic, or soft-spoken. But true self-worth isn't loud or passive, it's unshakable. It doesn't need to dominate, but it also doesn't hide. When you stop caring what people think, you begin to live with integrity. You tell the truth even when it's inconvenient. You stand up for yourself without guilt. You pursue what lights you up, even if others don't understand it. And in doing so, you build a life that reflects your essence, not your fear. There will always be people who don't like you, who misunderstand you, who judge you unfairly. That's part of being visible. But when your self-worth is internal, those judgments don't cut as deep. You don't personalize every comment. You don't spiral from every disagreement. You can hear criticism without crumbling. You can receive praise without becoming addicted to it. You stop riding the emotional roller coaster of other people's reactions because your sense of value is not riding with them. There's also a kind of quiet peace that comes when you're no longer performing. You don't have to rehearse conversations in your head or second guess every word. You don't feel the need to constantly adjust your personality to suit the environment. You become consistent because you're anchored. That consistency builds confidence. That confidence attracts the right people, and those people are drawn not to your image, but to your authenticity. Self-worth doesn't mean you think you're better than others. It means you know you don't need to be. You don't need to compete, compare, or prove. You can admire others without feeling inferior. You can be proud of yourself without needing to broadcast it. You don't chase value, you embody it. And from that place, you stop asking, am I good enough? And start declaring, I am whole. People-pleasing is often mistaken for kindness, but beneath the surface, it's a form of self-abandonment. It begins with good intentions, the desire to be liked, to avoid conflict, to make others feel comfortable. But over time, it becomes a compulsive habit of saying yes when you mean no, agreeing when you disagree, and showing up for everyone but yourself. This constant performance eats away at your authenticity. You become a mirror of what others want rather than a reflection of who you truly are. And the longer you live in that pattern, the further you drift from your own truth. The need to please is rooted in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear that if you stop giving, you'll stop being loved. But what people don't realize is that constantly seeking to be liked is a prison. It may win temporary affection, but it costs long-term peace. Every time you say yes out of guilt or fear, you send yourself a message that your own needs, values, and time are less important than someone else's comfort. That message accumulates. It chips away at self-respect. It trains you to silence your intuition, to ignore your limits, to suppress your voice. There's a deep loneliness that comes with people-pleasing, because even when you're surrounded by others, you're not truly seen. You're just accepted for the version of yourself you present. You can't form real connections if you're constantly editing yourself for approval. The more you bend, the more invisible you become. People may like you, but they don't know you. And that disconnection creates a quiet despair. You start to wonder if anyone could love you for who you really are, not just for what you do for them. Burning the bridge with people-pleasing is not about becoming harsh or selfish. It's about choosing integrity over image. It's about choosing discomfort in the short term so you can have alignment in the long term. When you stop molding yourself to fit others' expectations, you start living with internal consistency. Your words match your feelings. Your actions reflect your values. Your choices honor your energy. That congruence creates peace. You no longer wake up dreading your commitments or regretting your silence. You don't feel like you're performing life, you're living it. The fear of being disliked keeps many people stuck in the cycle. But being disliked is not the worst thing that can happen. Being dishonest with yourself is. Being drained, disrespected, and detached from your own life because you were too afraid to upset someone, that's the real loss. When you start honoring your truth, not everyone will celebrate you. Some people will fall away, some will push back, but the ones who remain will be the ones who see you clearly and respect your boundaries. People-pleasing also limits your growth. When you prioritize others' comfort over your own evolution, you stay small. You avoid taking bold steps, voicing your real opinions, or doing what feels right for you. You're constantly filtering yourself through the question, will they approve? And that question is a leash. It keeps you tied to environments, relationships, and habits that no longer serve you. True freedom begins the moment you stop asking for permission to be yourself. It takes courage to set the boundary, to say no, to walk away, to disappoint someone you care about. But that courage builds muscle. With every decision that aligns with your truth, your inner voice grows stronger. You begin to trust yourself more. You stop second-guessing. You don't need to rehearse conversations or justify your choices. You become solid, grounded in who you are, regardless of who agrees. This shift doesn't make life easier, but it makes it more honest. You may face conflict, but it's real conflict, not the silent, internal kind where you're at war with yourself. You may be misunderstood, but you'll be free. Saying goodbye to people-pleasing doesn't mean you stop being kind. It means your kindness is no longer a transaction. You give because you want to, not because you feel obligated. You help without resentment. You show up without losing yourself. That's real generosity when it comes from overflow, not from sacrifice. To stop people-pleasing is to reclaim your life. It's to stop living on borrowed standards and start defining your own. It's to stop asking, what do they want me to be? And start asking, who am I when no one's watching? That question leads to clarity. That clarity leads to confidence. And that confidence leads to peace. The kind of peace that doesn't need applause to feel valid. The kind that stays even when approval doesn't. You were not born to carry the weight of every opinion, to chase every approval, or to explain yourself to people who aren't listening. You were born to walk your own path with peace in your mind and fire in your purpose. When you care less about the noise and more about your truth, life simplifies, clarity returns, energy rises. Caring selectively gives you power. Releasing the need for external validation restores your freedom. Emotional detachment sharpens your focus. Boundaries protect your happiness. Inner self-worth silences the constant need to perform. And walking away from people-pleasing is the ultimate act of self-respect. So stop negotiating your peace. Stop apologizing for your truth. You don't need to be understood by everyone. You need to be honest with yourself. Because the moment you stop caring about what doesn't matter is the moment you become unstoppable.